Okay. Welcome everybody to the May Grafana Agent Community Call. Push back a little bit due to some other things that are going on, but we'll welcome everybody who's here. As always, feel free to type in chat, raise hand, get our attention some way if there's something you want to talk about, or you have a question about anything we're covering. We have a few things on the agenda, but yeah, we're kind of here for the community to talk about whatever you want to. We just have a few things so we're just not sitting here in silence. So um, I'll go ahead and get us started unless anybody has anything. Okay. So we have been, we've been talking about flow an awful lot here recently for probably the last 6 months of community calls, and this one is no different. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about modules, which is our new feature that essentially lets you load river configuration from different locations and load them up with a set of arguments, and they have a set of exports, and you can see all sorts of details about that in our documentation. And it went out in the last release, I believe, so you can use it today. But what we're going to talk about today is the Grafana modules repository. This is a separate repository from our standard Grafana agent. It is like GitHub/Grafana/agent-modules. There's a link in the agent, and I will be adding probably a link somewhere in the agent documentation, so it's got some cross link there. And essentially, we want to make this to be a blessed repository of functionality. We think that's great to share. We have a few things there already, such as Gotham submitted a hotel collector, submitted some LGTM collectors, and we're hoping to kind of build up a library of common use cases that people can basically just import, let's say through our module.get loader, and be able to pull that in. And we 100% would love any community suggestions, or if you've got a certain thing that you think you would like to share, this is the place for it. Put a PR out there. We'll give it a go over, and assuming everything's good, we'll pull it in. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be fancy. If it's got some good value, we'll pull it in. And I think to talk a little bit about more of that, we'll turn to Eric. But I'll say, does anybody have any questions about what the repository is before Eric gives us a little tour? All right, Eric, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, I should have unmuted before I was going to share screen. It's like a little dead silence there. Okay, so yeah, so we'll take a little peek here at this new repository, and then a little quick demo showing off how one of the modules works, what it takes to kind of set it up and run it. So here's the repository. There's, it's just getting started. So, oh yes, Zoom, you got it. Thanks for the reminder. So there's not a ton here, but we've kind of got the basic structure of what we want here. The two main things that I'll point you towards is this example folder, as well as then the modules folder we'll look at. So the example folder, just at a high level, I will say, is kind of a thing you can take a peek at that demonstrates how you can create modules. It's not necessarily the most practical way of doing it for the particular use case that it is, which is getting the agent's telemetry data out to the cloud. But nonetheless, it kind of shows you how you can set things up, how you can do arguments, how you can do exports. So some working examples of that, as well as, okay, what if I want to do this without a module? Well, here's what it would have looked like. What if I want to use each of our different module loaders? We have examples for each of those. So we've got the module file, the module get, and the module string implementation, leveraging the modules that exist in these subfolders. So gives you a little bit, you can poke around and see ways you can set things up. So that's the example folder. The modules folder, and here we've got a couple right now. This is where we really want to expand things, put real world use cases into here. And the one I want to show off today is same idea. So the telemetry data for the Grafana agent itself going up to the Grafana cloud. So for each module, we have a README, which will explain what the module arguments are. If it has any exports, it will explain what those are, as well as an example of how to leverage the module. So this particular module is sending data to Prometheus, Loki, and Tempo. So the example here you can see shows you passing all the arguments that it needs here in order to run the module. So let's take a look at that. So and this is using the module Git module loader, but it doesn't have to be specifically using that one. If you clone the repo or copy, Control C, Control V, whatever you want to do to use the module. So in the example here, and I know this might be a little small, but I just want to show this is literally the config file. It looks a lot like the example. I've just replaced some things with actual values and with environment variables for my credentials. And what's going to happen here is this module loader will actually go out to here and to the main branch. And here's the path to the module. And it will load the module from the repository with the arguments. Yeah, I'm not sure I can on the command line, Robert. On that.
You can. Sure you can. You got to hit Control Shift Plus.
Does that work? Control Shift. Yeah.
Oh, just kidding. Sorry.
I know it's when. Yeah. Anyways, I was just thinking of that right before, and I was like, I should look up how to do that. But anyways, it's this one, right? It's this one. I'll blow it up even bigger, one size larger. So that's kind of what I'm running. But I just want to show that in practice that's it. So this is going to run, right? It points at this module. So here's the actual contents of the module. You can see all the arguments are defined. The exports are defined here, and then here's all the flow components listed out. The specifics for now are not, super important. I don't want to cover that here. So here we go. So this is me running that config file, and I'm forwarding my logs into a file path. I think in the future we've talked about, and we're pretty close to not having to do that, so that the agent could forward its logs without having to write them to a file. So that'll just make it, slightly easier to do this, which will be cool. Okay, so that should be running. So we'll give it a minute. But here's up to the Grafana cloud. Looks like we've already got the logs coming in, and I expect we'll get hopefully a heartbeat with the metrics from the agent, and then some trace data. There we go. Okay, we've got all three, and no errors, no error logs that are filtered. So that's probably a good sign, right? Happens a lot in development. So anyways, all right. Any questions, thoughts on that? Okay. All right. Well, then I'll turn it back to Matt for the next topic.
I'll feed you some questions here.
Oh, sure.
What are the what are the kind of the documentation we're looking for when we submit, when someone wants to put in a module into the repository?
Yeah, good question. I think we're just kind of looking for what is the use case that it solves. Kind of a little bit what I covered is, what are the arguments, what are the exports that somebody looking to use the module can get a glance to say, hey, is this for me? I think we're still kind of learning what people are going to need, and that'll be coming from people using it in the community. So things are going to evolve, I would say, and we'll kind of go from there.
All right. If no one else has any more questions, we will move on to the next topic of conversation, which is new agent flow components, allowing agents to act as a proxy for logs and metrics. And I just blanked on who added this.
Piotr.
That will be
Piotr.
me.
Yeah. All right.
Let me set up. All right, I hope you can see that. So I'm Piotr, software engineer on Grafana Agent Squad. And today I'm going to give a preview of two new flow mode components that allow to run Grafana Agent as a proxy. So first we'll look at a high-level overview of Agent as a proxy, walk through an example configuration, and then have a quick demo and Q&A. So this is an overview, an example setup. And here we have agent one that is collecting logs and metrics from, let's say, logs from a file. Metrics could be scraped from Kubernetes cluster. And agent one sends the logs and metrics over the network to agent two. And agent two acts as a proxy and sends them further to, let's say, for example, to Loki or Prometheus. This setup can be useful, for example, if you want to keep credentials and configuration for sending telemetry to the DBs in one place only, or you want to have network connectivity restricted. So in this case, only agent 2 will be talking to the DBs. So in order to support this, Grafana agent version 0.34 will include two new components, Prometheus receive HTTP for receiving metrics over HTTP and Loki source API for receiving logs. The API expected by these new components is compatible with our existing logs and metrics sending components. And additionally, any other remote write clients in the ecosystem, such as Promtail, should be compatible with these new components. Let's now take a look at the configuration in a bit more detail. So in this example for metrics pipeline, agent one has a Prometheus scrape component, which scrapes agent's own metrics and forwards them to another component, Prometheus write, Prometheus remote write proxy, which is a component that will send metrics over HTTP to localhost port 9090, where we expect our proxy agent to receive them. And here it is, the proxy agent using the new component, Prometheus receive HTTP, which is listening for metrics over HTTP and forwarding them to yet another Prometheus remote write cloud component. There it is, which in turn sends those metrics to Prometheus. Note that only proxy agent needs to know the credentials for the managed Prometheus. The logs pipeline looks very similar, just using Loki specific components. So we have collecting logs from a file, sending logs to the proxy agent over HTTP. And the proxy agent is using the new component that receives logs over HTTP and forwards them using Loki write component to a managed Loki instance. So now I have a short demo. It's a recorded one. Well, hopefully it will be useful as well. So we have here a config that we can see that for agent one, we're using basically the same configuration we just walked through. And similar for the proxy agent, the config we just seen for logs and metrics. I also have this short script that will generate some logs. And a Grafana dashboard that will track some basic agent metrics and display the logs when we start receiving them. So now we'll start the logs producer script. And the proxy agent using the proxy config file we just seen. And the agent one using the collector config, we do override here the default port to avoid conflict between the two agents. And this is 10 times sped up, but after waiting a little bit, you can see that the dashboard populates with logs received from the producer and metrics from the agent. And this went from agent one via proxy to Grafana cloud in this instance, and now the data sources of these dashboards are reaching to that Grafana cloud. So that's it. That's all I have today. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Jorge.
I was just going to ask if you have any comments on how this model scales.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that we have been discussing internally, and we, you can scale vertically, but if you wanted to scale horizontally, which is probably what most people would ask about, we have not come up with a recommendation yet, but this is something we are discussing, and hopefully soon we will be able to recommend kind of a setup that will allow you to scale proxies and also provide some level of redundancy. Yes, Robert.
I should find a way to ask this as a question, but I don't know how, so I'm just going to say it. I think one of the cool things about how this is being done versus using the agent as a proxy into static mode is that you can have this chain to pipelines, right? So you can have an agent receiving logs over the network from another agent, but still have it do filtering or post-processing or whatever else you want to do. And that was not possible with static mode. So I think this is a nice new benefit that we have now with the flow components.
Yeah, you can add labels and all sorts of things here. Yeah. Yeah, Matt.
Could I conceivably transform from a Prometheus style metric to an OTel style metric?
I believe yes, but maybe somebody should correct me. Yeah, I believe there are components that we can use now to convert. Yeah. Thanks, Robert. Okay, one more call for any extra questions. Don't worry, there's still a chance to reach out. You can find us on communitygrafana.com or reach out on our Grafana public Slack channel. Thank you.
All right. Next topic on the agenda is opinionated dashboards and alerts for clustering. Kind of, we were talking a little. Somebody asked a question about scale. So, Pascalis.
Yeah, it's topical. So yeah, let me share my screen. Scaling Prometheus. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Cool. Yeah. So scaling Prometheus is hard, and I think that separating like your concerns with the agent makes it a tad easier, but still there's not a lot of room on how you can do things. In most of the cases, we either recommend that people use something agent-specific that's called host filtering to run the agent as a daemon set and only collect metrics from a local machine, or we recommend that they use hash-mode sharding, or even go to the operator. That provides a whole lot of more operational overhead that you have to worry about and scale the agent for your needs. And it was true all for static mode, but when we starting to mature flow as the way to run the agent, we thought that there's a better way to go about things. And this is how the whole idea of clustering went. So clustering should allow you to run the agent in a high available mode, being able to dynamically scale up and down to meet your workload. And we're soon going to publish some documentation around how to run the agent And part of all this effort is also providing some opinionated dashboards about being able to monitor your cluster of agents and be able to be alerted for any issues and try to understand what's going right or wrong with your cluster. So I want to share a couple of dashboards that we've created. They're available in the Grafana agent repo on our agent flow mixing. The first one is a dashboard that provides a general overview of the whole cluster. That signifies, it says how many nodes we have. There's a node table about the agent that we have and their state, whether some agent is starting up and is still pending as a viewer agent, or is shutting down, is at the terminating state, or it's signified that it's going to participate into distributing the load. You can also see the information here, as well as a state timeline to see how your cluster has been evolving through time. Here we can see that when we deployed some new versions with these annotations, we had a brief moment where, like, for a few seconds, for like 15 seconds, this cluster was not converted as a new pod was coming along. But since these time frames are quite small in comparison to the scrape interval, you shouldn't be losing any data. By converged, we mean that we have reached the eventual consistent state of the cluster, where every node knows about all the rest of its peers and is up to date about their state. So they can all individually work together to distribute the load and not miss any metrics. From here, we can drill down to a specific node that we want to see more information about, where we can see some more detailed information around how many peers that does this node knows about, and what is the state of these peers, and what is the data bandwidth that is being used for a streaming and a packet-based communication, the success rate of this communication, as well as if there are any pending packets that cannot be sent. From this dashboard, we can see that the overhead of clustering is pretty low. So for this 4-node cluster, we see that it's about 200 bytes per second for the packet-based communication, plus another like 30 to 50 bytes for the streaming always open over HTTP2 connections. And I think we've tested with around up to 150 nodes. And if I'm not mistaken, we never got up more than 1 kilobytes per second of traffic that's required to synchronize those nodes. One more thing is that we're also providing some alerts so that we can you can be alerted for when your cluster is not converging after a set amount of time, or you can detect cases where due to some network glitch, it has fallen into a split brain state. You can get notified around when the Lambert clocks of the nodes are not propagating correctly, which I'll explain in a short bit. Alert on the node, the health score of each nodes, on whether there's a name conflict or there are nodes that cannot be terminated, or if there's a cluster configuration drift. For the two things that I haven't really explained, each node keeps a Lambert clock time, which is a way for these nodes to roughly order the messages that they're exchanging with one another. Each time a node receives a message from another peer, it increments its own clock by the time that it has seen being reported by another peer plus 1. So ideally, this should always increase in value as nodes are gossiping messages about one another. Lastly, one of these assumptions that we're making around this clustering is that all nodes will be working with the same configuration file, and we can structure our river configs in a way that you don't have to, like Hashmod, provide different configurations for each agent, which is a brittle and it's a brittle process that can easily lead to errors. So we can also alert on the hash of these configuration files and, for example, pick up cases where a config map has not been propagated correctly, or cases where, for example, there are clusters that are running on the same namespace but might have conflicting jobs to distribute between themselves. Yeah, as I said, these are available on the mixin in the Grafana agent repo. If you're not familiar with how mixins work and how you can make use of them in your own clusters, feel free to reach out on our GitHub or our community Slack, and we can provide some help with that. And we hope that once this is out with the next release, you can continue playing with clustering and provide your feedback on it. Any questions here?
I think we had a question in chat. Robert, go ahead.
Pascal answered the question in chat. I have two questions. One, could you show the remote write dashboard just to demonstrate that like they're sharing kind of active series amongst themselves? You can click on the dashboards button on. Okay, none of those are the right one. The dashboards drop down on the.
I see.
On the right side there, yeah. So the very bottom set of panels will show kind of. Oh, it's only showing one agent. I think you have to change the dashboard variable.
So here you can see that in the previous setup, we were sending like a million samples per second, while here we've dropped by half because we don't have to run 2 replicas of each pod for high availability because it's handled by the agent themselves. Luckily, this also means that you can cut your agent costs in half. So if you're using Hashmode sharding to scale your agents in a way that you can meet demand, this can not only make your setup like easier to handle, but also much cheaper.
So if we were to add a new agent, the active series would increase slightly for a little while, but then it would eventually even out to redistribute the load amongst the new set of agents. And you can kind of see that here, like whenever we do a rollout, like it jumps up a little bit because they're all kind of shuffling, but eventually like it redistributes. So like if you're going to use clustering, we'll eventually have this written down as a recommendation. But you'll want to make sure that like no single agent, like if you lose one or two of your shards, that like the whole thing doesn't get brought down. My second question, Pascal, is how do you configure this? Like, what do you have to do to turn this on?
Okay, so that should be quite easy. If you go to the command line interface and the Grafana run command, you need to pass the cluster enabled flag and set it true, as well as a list of join addresses so that specifically where the agents can find one another. Right now, to do that, we're using a headless service in Kubernetes, because if you pass DNS name instead of an IP address, it will perform a SRV lookup, and it will try to connect to all the addresses that it finds through that name. And after you see that your agents are able to be connected to one another, you can go to prometheus.scrape and flare.scrape, which are the two components that currently support clustering, and set the enabled attribute in the clustering block to true. If all of the agents in the cluster are running using the same configuration file and are receiving the same target from many service discovery mechanisms, this means that the load will automatically be distributed between one another. Robert corrected me that flare.scrape is not yet released, but will be in v0.34, which is about like 3 weeks out now. Any other questions? All right, thank you for your time. We'll continue providing, policing this experience and providing more instructions around how to make you successful using clustering, and hope to get your feedback.
All right, that was great. Now, the last topic of the agenda is the review of open proposals. But before we jump into that, because that could take literally the rest of the call, does anyone have any topic they would like to bring up? All right. I'm going to share my screen. So we have, just to give you a head up, we have in the issues, share screen would also a window. Oh my gosh. Click the allow. Single window. I think it's this one. I have a lot of Firefox windows up. All right. Hopefully you see a big long list of proposals. Awesome. So we have filtered specifically for flow, and we have the, by date. I think we can skip this flow release plan, Robert.
Yeah, do we want to take that off of proposal? I don't even think it's a real proposal. It's just kind of like, or we can just close it. I don't know. Oh God, I don't know. You know, I'll leave it. You can just ignore it for now. I'll figure out what to do with this later.
All right. The next one is a local.exec, one of the oldest conversations around flow. This is essentially being able to run an arbitrary thing, executable script on a machine and get the output.
Can you zoom in, Matt? Just a little bit.
Oh.
It's unfortunate that someone says to be appreciated because I want to close this. I want to reject my own proposal. I think last time we talked about this, like there's a lot of concerns about security, right? It's like the things you could like with modules in mind. You could hypothetically get a module which does a lot of malicious things, right? Like you could have a module which reads any file on your file system and sends that file to somewhere else. So you should trust module sources. But I think the blast radius of a malicious local exec is a lot more dramatic. Like someone could force remove your root file system, right? And I think based on that, and based on the use case I originally proposed, I'm just not seeing it yet. Like I think it's I'm not sure it's worth it, even though I think it'd be neat.
I'll call upon myself. I agree with this. I think it's possible. I'm sorry. I agree with Robert that we should close this. I think it's possible maybe once we get the capabilities proposal, which is probably way, way, way down the line, maybe this gets a little more legs. But even then, it's pretty scary.
I want to take a step back real quick and say, like, we haven't really done a lot of these, right? Like we've only talked about proposals once live, and I think we're still figuring out what does it mean to say this is rejected. I think rejection never means like no forever, right? But it means that like right now this is not really aligned with our goals, and like for the reason of security, we're probably saying that this is rejected. Although I think we have to take a vote on that, right? Like just me saying this is being rejected doesn't mean it's rejected. But we do have the governance team here. I think most of them, right? Maybe there's enough for like super majority. If we want to do like a governance vote now, we could to whether or not this is rejected or not, or we can just say rough consensus. Like, yeah, no, we don't see this being in the direct plans right now. What should we do?
Any disagree? I mean, I think we do rough consensus. Is there any disagreements on closing this, or anyone who's really wants to keep it?
Ooh, can you change that as closed as not planned?
Yeah. Why doesn't that?
I'm being
Sorry,
nitpicky.
that-
It's in the drop down, like with reopen.
Let's see what you did. Do I have to literally reopen it?
You don't have to
And then-
reopen it. You can just do the drop down, I think.
Okay.
But
Wow.
that's fine.
Okay. All right. So theoretically, that one disappears. We have one for this is done, right? What do we not got here?
I don't know if it's done, but it's accepted. You can add the accepted label.
I think it's kind of a tracking issue for some components that we haven't had the chance to add yet. But yeah, I think we can skip this and go ahead with the rest of.
Multi-tenant remote write support. Pascal, you created this one.
Yeah, so the initial idea was that we could do something simple like Cortex tenant, which we could recognize the drawback and the performance penalty, but have something that people might find useful. I don't know how you feel. I think that going through a proper solution for this would be a much more involved effort. Pauline did some work on it, so he may have more context around it. But the question for me is, do we do something immediately usable knowing the drawback that it has, or do we just drop it completely for now and figure it out later?
So I published an RFC for this. There's a pull request which has been open for a while. And I think the main drawback with the Cortex tenant approach was that it doesn't have much resiliency. So if there's any issue, it doesn't really fail over very nicely. You might lose your data. Yeah, so I don't know exactly how much time it would take to make a more resilient approach. And
Okay, so
I'm not quite sure what's the use case for this in the wild, for example, and like how much resilience you need and etc., and how much features you need.
Go ahead, Robert.
I see the value of this. And this kind of leads me to the next point of like accepting a proposal doesn't mean we're going to plan it for work right away either, right? But unlike local exec, I think this has a lot more clear use cases and there's little risk to it. It's just, will we have the time to implement it? I don't know. But like I would accept it in terms of this functionality would be accepted into the agent, I think, if there was a PR.
Pascal?
in my mind, we should add the accepted label, but explicitly say that we scope it down to just a Cortex tenant wrapper with all the good and the bad that comes with it.
So are you saying you want to accept a specific implementation, or do you want to accept the idea of multi-tenancy?
Okay, I see. So yeah, that's a good question. We shouldn't decide on the implementation right now. Okay, let's go with the idea then.
I'll call upon myself. I like the idea. I'm not necessarily sold on the specific implementation, but I think proposals should be more idea-based.
Given that this was suggesting a proposal, suggesting an implementation, do we want to say this issue is rejected, but a generic proposal would be accepted? Again, I'm just flying by the seat of my pants here. I don't know what I'm doing.
It's a bit nitpicky, I think.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I'm just going to suggest you could maybe just specify that in the comment versus creating a bunch more paperwork if you guys were okay with that. Just say we're
You don't like paperwork. What?
not particularly. But this keeps all the history and what was originally proposed here. And yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because anybody
there
going
any-
to do the work should read through. It's not that much for be a train.
Kind of like we've been at it to a milestone. But yeah, I guess, does anybody have a problem? Anybody have an against accepting this?
Apparently, it's already planned for work, so I think it's been
Yeah,
accepted for a while.
I believe we've got it on a milestone. But I'll add the tag here. Now it's like legit accepted, right?
Yeah.
All right. Robert, I have no. Is valid
Oh.
anymore?
Oh, this is accepted. This has been in progress.
All right, cool. Should have added. Oh, I would have found it. All right. Okay. Is this done?
No. Also, I want to skip over this because this is like an internal
Okay.
API thing, internal user facing.
Don't use quotation marks in block names. Okay. So I think this one's had quite a bit of history, maybe. Yeah, but basically, instead of doing this way, you can do a variety of ways. Colin, maybe you want to give us a quick comment on this?
Yeah, so this is something that I found quite confusing when I first started using River. When you use quotation marks, it sort of makes it look like string rather than a component name. And I thought it would be more consistent with other programming languages if we don't use the quotation marks. Yes, Matt?
Yeah, I'm in general favor of this. I also would be in favor of purely dot notation, which is probably a more contentious thing. And by dot notation, I mean creating the ID as you would be if you were referencing it. Go ahead, Robert.
My concerns with this is it makes it ambiguous what part of this is a label, what part of this is a component name. And I mean, it would be less of a problem when we remove singletons, because like the only time where the last thing is not a label is with exporter Unix. That'll go away eventually, and that'll be, sorry, the component will stay, but the fact that it doesn't support labels will go away. So maybe I'll be more in favor of this then, but for right now, it makes it ambiguous, and I think that is a reason I would say no, because it is nice to be able to clearly see where the component name starts and where the label starts.
And that's also true when using syntax highlighting to skim through a file. You can easily see what the component name is and what its type is. It's labeled at its type.
Call by myself. Part of me also feels that the ship has sailed to some degree, that going back and changing it or making it handle both, that just seems painful.
Yeah, I guess I was just going to ask, are we suggesting replacing how it works today or adding an additional mechanism? Because replacing it introduces a lot of complexity. I mean, I maybe would introduce the new one and then maybe deprecate the old one you'd have to do it for a while. Anyways, so just something to consider.
Go ahead, Robert.
I don't think breaking changes are a concern. Like, we can find ways to support both in a way that's, transparent to the user and maybe not super annoying. But I'm still in favor of saying no to this one. This feels like this one might need a vote rather than rough consensus. Do we have a needs vote label? I don't think we do.
Go ahead.
So Robert, to your point about not distinguishing the name, when you reference the receiver, as you can see, that second block, yeah. I mean, there's that also just dots, and you cannot differentiate the name that easily from the component name.
No, that's fair. I'm talking more about the declaration than I am the. It is a lot easier for us to. So okay, sorry. The context here is when we used HCL instead of River. It was hard to tell, when the component name stopped and then when the label started, and we had to have a bit of logic around it, trying to do a lookup of Prometheus remote write default, and then that would fail. So then we would do Prometheus remote write, and then we would kind of iteratively search backwards until we find a component name. just because of how HCL works. So that is why when like I was essentially forking HCL, I made the choice to clearly differentiate between the two. But that was only a problem for the declaration, not for the referencing. For the referencing, it was never an issue.
I'll call it by myself. This is where I'm going to ask our visitors, Christine and Nicola. Hopefully I got your names correct. Apologies if not. Do either of you use Flow? And if so, is it confusing to shift between the label syntax and the dot syntax? Because I think most of the developers who are Grafana, we've been using it for a long time, and there is no, or there's less confusion. If you don't want to chat, that's fine. I'll just give a second here if anybody wants to jump in, either of you two. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's a little hard if you haven't had any experience with it, but you just do it. Just get in and do it, and then it.
All right. Great. Paulin?
Just to clarify something, so about this label syntax, what the proposal is suggesting is that if the component name is declared with quotation marks, it makes sense to reference the quotation marks. If it's not referenced with quotation marks, it makes sense to also be declared without quotation marks. That's kind of what it is. So we don't have to use this label, kind of map-like notation. We could simply get rid of the quotation marks in the declaration of the component. But yeah, if that's too difficult, then that's not a problem. I just thought it's a bit confusing for first-time users. So yeah, just to clarify, there's no proposal here to switch from yeah, we don't have to switch necessarily to a label notation. We could just not use quotation marks at the component definition.
All right, I think this needs to vote. Let's not vote now, but let's put this on some type of voting queue, and then we'll make the decision there.
I'll make a note to probably make a label or do something.
You can just add a label from here, like needs vote. We can
Do we
fix
have
it
a needs
later.
vote or just?
Well, you can just put something in, and then
Oh.
it'll suggest you to.
Dash.
Good enough. Cool.
Are you saying this is for governance?
Sure. Whatever.
Okay.
Someone
I
needs
didn't
to
know-
vote.
Yeah. All right. We'll say governance. Cool. And maybe we have time for one more. Oh Lord. The next one, add conditional expressions to river.
That one's already accepted.
Oh, it is. Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't know when we did that, but it's already accepted apparently.
Support JSON and YAML forms in place of river. Can we get that done in 7 minutes? Let's
No,
see.
I don't. Well, we can try. All right.
Yeah, let's see. Let's just see. So yeah, do you want us to give us a very quick overview of what this does?
I mean, okay, so tools like Terraform support HCL, but they also support being configured with YAML or JSON. So this is kind of the equivalent of that thing where River, while I like writing it in an editor, it doesn't technically play nice with a lot of tools like Helm charts or whatever. So the proposal here is to accept some type of JSON and YAML representation of River, with the drawback that if we add, and we will add new language features like variables and stuff like that, those might not have a direct representation in the more kind of machine readable formats. I think I propose, if you scroll down a little bit, I do propose what that might look like. Yeah, so kind of side by side there. Just, I mean, it's YAMLified. I don't know how else to say it.
I'll call upon myself. I don't particularly like this proposal, or I don't like Well, yeah, this proposal of having JSON and YAML feels like it really opens up our surface area. And I don't know if we can support all features of, like I said, of River in these languages or in YAML or JSON without it being real ugly. And we are doing the configuration conversion to some degree from like static mode. So if you really wanted to write YAML, you could do that and get away with it for a very long time. It just wouldn't be River, or it wouldn't be Flow. Ugh, terminology. Eric?
Is this one that's kind of like more of a down the road type of thing, like to be revisited later? Or do we have like a pressing use case that we think this would help with?
We used to have a pressing use case, which was allowing Helm charts from across Grafana to adopt Flow and still have templating support with Helm. But we since identified a separate path to enable the same use case, which didn't require this. So now this is more of a, does it help adoption of Flow when integrating with tooling like Helm or Terraform or whatever else is deploying agents? Does this help make Flow be used more?
It's a lot of quiet.
If you're open to just a newbie beginner perspective, once I get the hang of the River file, using that is so much more simpler to configure than my YAML file. And I understand there's totally different use cases across the environment, but yeah, no, I love it.
Awesome. I will say, if people want to disagree, you're more than free to.
Yeah, I mean, because we don't have a pressing use case right now, and because this is a little contentious, I'd be okay with closing it and say, like, we're open to rediscussing this later if it comes up again. But right now, it hasn't come up. To be honest, I was really jumping the gun with this one. I'm just assuming problems might happen, and maybe they will, maybe they won't.
Pascalis?
My 2 cents is that if we close it, let's just add the note that this might help when people are trying to provision flow configuration with some other tool, so that somebody who is searching for it in the future will find and ping us again on this. But yeah, I'd say let's just keep it for now.
Okay.
Some good feedback in the chat too.
Yeah. Eric?
Yeah, I was just going to respond to Nicola's comment there, and I want to say that that's one of I think our visions for the module repos, that each of those modules or the River configs in there do double as a live working example as well. So we want to see that grow, because I think I definitely agree that more examples, more real world use cases out there will make it easier for people to adopt. So we're at the very beginning of that, but hopefully it'll take off.
I also think it makes it visually easy to see what you're dealing with when we say, if you've got YAML, you're in static. If you've got River, you're in Flow. Robert?
All right. It feels like we have rough consensus for closing as rejected for now. Like, we can revisit this in the future. Maybe that's true for all rejections.
Damn it.
Should we have a new label just for my proposals? That's like garbage. This is the garbage proposal. Just for me, though, not for anyone else.
All right.
You need to add there's a rejected label, right?
Oh, let me add that. I'll add that here in a second, because I think we're pretty much coming to time. I don't think
I'll add it in the background.
Okay. So yeah, this is great. We'd love any feedback about doing, especially the proposals. That's something that's pretty new. So if you all have any feedback on, hey, it's cool, or no, this was a big time waste, or somewhere in between, or ways to improve it, feel free to put it in the channel or the document. And as always, if there's any topics you'd like to see next month, please put those in the document. And this will be going up on YouTube here in a few days, roughly. And I appreciate everybody showing up. And we'll see you hopefully in a month.
Everyone.